The needs and expectations of growing composed mainly of young people. The Sudanese telecoms billionaire turned benefactor was even more blunt. Quote unquote, they lost opportunity of the past decade is deeply concerning. Here are more highlights from that particular report. All right, our conversation today is based on the 2018 Ibrahim Index of African Governance. As you've just seen, the African governments have failed to translate economic wealth into sustainable economic opportunity for their citizens. In a bid to actually put more light on this particular topic, Alex Manyasi, who's a governance expert, joins us in studio to shed light on this particular issue. Now, as a whole, what stood out for me is perhaps the progress of African countries is being led by a handful of nations that have pulled up the average, while in many countries momentum continues to actually alter or falter rather. Now, from a governance point of view, perhaps let's start with the link between development and governance.
Thank you very much, and for having me this afternoon. So, one of the things that we must always understand is that it's not possible to actually develop any country unless the governance structures are actually properly laid out. What do I mean by that? It's the way you manage your resources, it's the way you manage your country, it's the way you manage your people. If you're able to do that, then you can access sustainability and in the process have development. But unless that is well laid out, then it may not be possible to actually translate any meaningful development at the end of the day.
Well, that's very important. But what stood out, perhaps, in terms of governance? Well, we know a couple of things play a hand, not just in terms of security fears. We also have a couple of things that also push African countries to the peak of their productivity. We have peace, we have government transparency, and the respect for the rule of law. What say you about these three factors in terms of governance transparency, in terms of the respect of the rule of law, not just in Kenya, but Africa as a continent?
One of the reasons why Africa has lagged behind in the world today is because of just what you're saying, in terms of understanding that there's a very close connection between, for example, understanding the rule of law, respecting the fact that if elections are done, then you respect the voice of the people, understanding that if in office, you use that office for the benefit of the citizens and not for your own benefit. So as long as those things are not followed through, then at the end of the day, what you get is you have an area where there are shortcuts being used. You find a situation where, and that happens in Africa a lot, where people seek power, people seek offices, not for the sake of being the citizens, but for advancing their own interests. that is what kills Africa. And for that sense, you will get situations where other people come to invest in Africa. That investment does not translate into the citizens because the kickbacks that are given and all these things that happen, at the end of the day, do not make a country or the continent successful in terms of moving forward economically. When economically a country doesn't observe this, what happens is that you end up with different sectors which lag behind, sectors that don't grow as fast as they should, and therefore you do not create employment, therefore you have a disgruntled citizenship, and then you do not have people attaining high quality standards of life.
Well, you've put it very, perhaps even presented my next question in terms of enabling citizens to pursue the economic goals and also giving them an opportunity to prosper. Well, African countries, well, you've mentioned that perhaps leaders go into political positions to benefit themselves particularly, but what say you in terms of enabling members of whichever country within Africa to actually claim economic goals and also advance in terms of opportunities to prosper?
It starts by respecting the instruments that we have put in place. Examples, for example, is if you have a judiciary, you have the executive. The best thing that you can do is make sure that these entities are actually performing independently without interference from each other. So majorly you'll have an executive, you'll have a judiciary, and you'll have an executive, a legislature in many countries. So when these entities function independent of each other, then they're able to check each other. In Kenya, for example, we have those three and an additional one, which we call the fourth one, which is the constitutional commissions. So when they check each other, when they operate independently, as they should, as envisaged within the existing legislation, then you get a scenario where the country benefits from the resources that it has. In this sense, for example, if in terms of observing the rule of law, if people know that if there's a problem and they are taken to court, they can expeditiously expect an outcome in terms of judgment, which is fair and free from any interference, then what happens is that that translates into a country where an investor could come in knowing that if something went wrong, they can actually get justice. So with that, what that translates into also is that you will get investment coming in and therefore expanding the economy and therefore creating employment. And that is how also a country becomes attractive for investment. So attractiveness in terms of investment is anchored on all these things that we are talking about. Do we have a justice system that works? When it comes to investing in a country, you look at, is the political stability there in the first place? Or do you expect that in a coming election you need to run away to your country because you're not sure what will happen to that country during that period? You know that, for example, if something happens to you and you're arrested, you will get fair trial. You know, for instance, that you will not wake up one morning, go to work or go somewhere and then disappear in the process because the system in the country works. You know very well that if you invest your money, someone will not con you and get away with it. So these are things that are globally aligned in terms of how we look at, and the World Bank has done this. Mo Ibrahim is doing this in terms of just ensuring that he encourages African countries to actually look at how Africans can govern themselves properly. Beyond that, we used to have NDGs. Now we have Sustainable Development Goals. So the thinking is, for example, can we move away from just providing sanitation to providing the same sustainably? Can we move away from providing just education, but providing education that is sustainable? If you're providing agriculture, don't just provide agriculture for the sake of food, but is it sustainable in the way it's being provided? Can you, for example, have water provision in a sustainable manner? So that we're not just saying, let's tap from the rivers. You're saying, as we tap from the rivers, how does the source look like? How do we ensure that this water, where it's coming from, is actually safeguarded and therefore 20 years or 50 years from today, we can still have water flowing. That is sustainable development. So at the end of the day, we need to, Africa needs to look at itself from that sense. The most annoying thing that I always see is that the rest of the world took almost 200 years to get these things in place. Africa has an opportunity not to invent anything. We can just copy things done. The unfortunate bit is that we keep making mistakes as though there's no other country that has done, or there's no other part of the world that has done what we are trying to do. If it comes to things like railway, for instance, there's nothing that you're going to invent. If it comes to roads, there's nothing you're going to invent. If it's about technology that is most efficient and most cost-effective, there's nothing that you're going to invent. So why not just take up these opportunities? The issue that we keep talking about is cost and money and resources. But at the same time, there are also other parts of the world that are actually willing to put in those resources and make them long-term income for themselves and for ourselves. So why not just take the cue on where the world has come from and implement these things so that we can get Africa where it's supposed to be. African continent, for example, has most of its population is the young generation.
Yes, the youth. Yeah.
So if we don't take care of this today sustainably, then we have a crisis in future, because other parts of Europe, for example, their generation, most of their population is the older generation. Now, they're spending more money taking care of the people who are aged. But Africa has a vibrant young population which needs to work. So we need to put them to work. We need to ensure that they have something to do. How do we make sure that they have something to do? By ensuring that we have a vibrant economy, that we're investing in the right places sustainably, and that we are attracting investment to ensure that the young people of these nations have something to do.
Well, we'll definitely delve deeper, especially on matters touching the youth, because you bluntly brought it out, because Africa's perhaps greatest expert, not just to ourselves, but to the rest of the world, is actually our youthful generation, of which has also been highlighted in the 2018 Ibrahim Index of African Governance. So we'll just get back. Alex Manyasi is a governance expert, and he's been in this perspective. Let's take a short break here in Bottomline Africa. We'll leave you with Destiny.